To the absolute consternation of every liberal and every neocon, two sides of the same coin, the World Cup in Russia is off to a roaring start, both on the field and off it. The Russian people have risen to the occasion, welcomed the world with open arms. There are no tanks on the streets. There are no racists on the rampage. There are no homophobes on the lookout for unwitting gay people to beat and trash. The Russian public services are working like clockwork. Now, any fair-minded person welcomes that, but the liberal Guardian, I spit the word, is still determined to rain on Russia's parade, still determined to trash the entire affair, right down to attacking Robbie Williams as being a stooge of a dictator for performing at the opening ceremony of the World Cup. Hey, the Russians gave us Shostakovich. We gave the Russians. Take that. I'm not a big fan of Robbie Williams, but this is the FIFA World Cup. It is a legitimate competition, and everyone should be hoping, surely, that it goes well. Is Gareth Southgate a stooge for a dictator because he's there? Is Cristiano Ronaldo, who just put Portugal ahead in the first minute of the game that's going on alongside this show, is he a stooge of Putin because he's at the World Cup? You disgust me, Guardian, and no right-thinking person, or rather, no left-thinking person, should be giving you house room. You are a disgrace to anything called liberal. And the current House of Commons is a disgrace to anything called Parliament. What a week it's been in Parliament. A collection of the au pair tendency. And the Guardian was lamenting this very week how Brexit's going to make it so difficult for those looking for au pairs. They speak of little else in Dagenham. They speak of little else in the East End of Glasgow. But the au pair tendency, the Chablis tendency, were out in all their ugliness this week in Parliament, trying to wreck a decision made by 17.5 million people for Britain to leave the European Union. I tell you, if you were in any doubt over whether we should be leaving the EU, just take a look at the people that we are negotiating with, and just take a look at the fifth column inside our own Parliament, in our media class, who are trying to wreck it. You turn if you want to. I am not for turning. Speaking of you, Umunna, Chuka Umunna, is, according to the New Statesman, off and running with preparations for a new party. Back together might be a name for a reunion of Take That, though not quite as cultured, not quite as exciting. Back Together is the working title for a new centre party, presumably led by the Robbie Williams of politics, Chuka Umunna. He says it's garbage, but the New Statesman is never knowingly wrong when it comes to covering the Blairite wing of the Labour Party. Why would they be? They are the House Journal of it, and would be the House Journal of any new centre party. So, for me, get it on, Chuka! At least Neville Sanderson had the courage of his convictions. But that's not all that's been happening in Parliament this week. The House of Commons restaurant has been forced to rename the popular dessert dish, known hitherto as Spotted Dick, known for generations, known probably for centuries in the House of Commons restaurant as Spotted Dick, has now been renamed Spotted Richard. And I'm not, as Richard Littlejohn would say, I'm not making that up. Not that they've abolished dicks in Parliament, of course. One of them just popped up today. Yes, sir, if you don't mind, a knight of the realm, Christopher Chope, a weirdo, and I've known him for more than 30 years. A House of Commons weirdo, henceforth known as Peeping Chope, wrecked a private member's bill with the simple word object. And what was that private member's bill trying to do? Do something that every father, every husband, every woman, every girl in the land would have supported. Namely, to make it a crime for creeps to secretively, furtively, without permission, take photographs up women's skirts. And I'm told, though I rarely visit the dirty end of the internet, post the offending articles online shortly thereafter. Now, that's what our Parliament is reduced to. One dick can shout one word, and perverts can continue to ply their filthy trade, taking upskirt shots of women on buses, on tube trains, in workplaces, and spread the filth that they have seized without permission, without consent, across the internet. Now, I say this to Theresa May, and I don't often give her advice. For the Conservative Party, if you do not reverse this outrage, this parliamentary outrage, immediately, the Conservative Party will be damned in the eyes of all right-thinking people, as most right-thinking people have already damned it. And one of the reasons why is the shameful so-called universal, so-called credit that has taken 5 years to roll out, has been rolled out only to 10% of claimants, and is already officially an unmitigated disaster. It's official. The National Audit Office has just released an utterly damning report which shows that Ian Duncan-Smith's flagship welfare policy is an anti-welfare policy, is causing pain, grief, tears, blood, even death amongst the poorest and most vulnerable people in our country, and all to save money. Except it doesn't even save money, according to the National Audit Office. So if I may take the opportunity to give Theresa May a second piece of advice in a single monologue on one radio show, it would be, Theresa, ditch universal credit, or be forever damned as the nasty party that you once described it as. And we'll be talking to a Cuban MP, a capital H hero of Cuba, a man who spent 15 years locked up in the land of the free with 4 of his compatriots, known as the Miami Five. And what were they doing? The Miami Five? They were monitoring, seeking to subvert, seeking to thwart acts of terrorism emanating from the epicenter of the war on terror. Miami, Florida, is a nest of gold-toothed Cuban emigres, a part of whose number have hijacked civilian airliners, murdered on an industrial scale, placed bombs in tourist hotels in Cuba, tried hundreds of times to murder the late Cuban leader Fidel Castro. A full-on, full-scale terrorist operation, openly operating in the United States of America. And when Cuba sent in agents undercover to infiltrate these terrorist organizations instead of the cooperation of the United States, the intelligence men and women were arrested and thrown into prison for 15 years. You couldn't make it up. And you'll hear from me the extraordinary story of the Miami Five with a visitor from Cuba with whom I'm speaking tomorrow afternoon at Hamilton House in Mableton Place. His name is Fernando Gonzalez, and trust me, you'll be sorry if you miss him. I'm George Galloway. This is the mother of all talk shows. Now, Charlotte Hughes is a blogger for The Poor Side of Life, fantastic blogger too, which exposes the unfair treatment of job seekers and the horrors of universal credit. Charlotte has been one of the most prodigious campaigners on the issue of universal credit, which has been damned for 5 years, indeed longer, before it was even introduced, as being nothing more than a disaster. That's now official, following a report from the National Audit Office, to which I referred earlier in the show. I'm glad to say Charlotte joins me now. Charlotte, thanks for coming on the show.
Hi, George. Lovely to speak to you.
You must be vindicated. You must feel entirely vindicated now that the boffins of the National Audit Office are on your side.
I absolutely do. It's a case of I feel vindicated. We knew this all along, but also I feel very frustrated as well that the government still don't seem to be listening. So, yeah, it's a double-edged
Well, you say
sword.
that, but they will have been damaged. Their confidence will have been damaged massively by the criticism of the National Audit Office. Can you summarise for us what the office said?
It basically said that it's costing more money than it is to... basically, they're spending more money than they are actually saving, and that it hasn't achieved any of its aims, basically, apart from maybe getting people work. But the sort of work they're finding is very debatable. It hasn't reached the targets like it should have been. It's changed plan many times. People aren't receiving payments in time. I could go on and on and on.
No, please do, because I think a lot of the listeners need to know just how bad this universal credit is.
All right, okay. Well, I can tell you now, universal credit, if you're living on universal credit, if you're working and living on universal credit is literally living, it's like hell on earth. It's awful, it really is. So one of the criticisms from the report was saying that people don't get paid in time, or they don't get a payment when they're expecting it. And that is true, and people's payments are delayed. If you're working and say your wages get paid a few days early, then you'll get, the DWP will say, well, you've got 2 wages in 1 month, so they'll stop your month's wages. Sorry, not wages.
Benefit,
Yeah, sorry, George. It's
no
just
problem.
been mad today. They said that it was supposed to be created to reduce fraud and error, but there's actually no proof of that at all. So they can't even monitor that. They've not got the ability of monitoring that.
And 1 in 5 claimants is being paid late.
Exactly, and that's if you're working and not working.
Yeah.
So in the old days, people thought that, well, people were, if you weren't working, you're on benefits. I hate that term, it's social security, but that's what you were on. But now everyone working and not working will be rolled over onto this. So if you're claiming, say, housing benefit because your wage is low, you'll be rolled over onto this eventually. So it's discriminatory on anyone who's on a very low income. It's absolutely appalling. I mean, you left for at least 8 weeks with no money while you're waiting for it to come through.
This is for people mainly, indeed, entirely, or they wouldn't be on the benefit.
Yeah.
This is for people at the bottom of the heap. This is about the poorest people in the country. Sometimes waiting 8 weeks. For you would starve to death in 8 weeks.
People have starved to death. People have committed suicide, George. You know, and it's okay for the government to say, well, you can get an advance payment. I was speaking to a lady yesterday who received an advance payment, and they're having to pay back now £200 a month for 2 lots of advance payments. That's coming out of her universal credit payment, which was only £300 a month. So can you imagine that being taken out of your pocket?
Unbelievable.
When you've got nothing anyway. And this is where it's wrong. It is persecuting the poor, George. And I mean, anyone needs to read my blog to find out what it actually does. It does not cater for a person's individual needs. So say a disabled person is catered for in exactly the same way as an able-bodied person. So, and everyone needs different things, okay, George? That's how the way the benefit system or the social security system was created for different people, for differing needs. That's why everybody was on something a bit different. Now it isn't. They think that they can just lump every single person in this country into one benefit and think, right, that's okay then, let's just leave it. You know, these people will be okay. It doesn't matter if they go hungry at all.
And their excuse was that this could save £8 billion, but the National Audit Office, a rather more trustworthy body than parliamentarians these days, says there's no evidence that it's going to save anything at all.
Absolutely not. And indeed, I wrote an article last year about how much money it actually costs. It costs more than what they are actually saving. So that actually, George, isn't hard to research for anybody that's interested in that. If you break it down, it costs more. Okay, it costs more in mental health treatment. It costs more in hospitalisation. It costs more in homelessness. It costs more. I mean, if you value a person's life, it costs a person's life. So we're impacting on this. I mean, the people I speak to, the first time I see someone, they look pretty healthy, and then you can see their health decline.
Yeah.
Because it's more and more without money, and this is a long-run effect on their mental health, on their physical health. So they're relying on mental health services, which are near enough non-existent at the moment. They're being admitted to hospital with malnutrition-related illnesses, and they're being released into the home with no food. Now, we were the first hospital in the country, Tameside Hospital, to open a food bank in our hospital.
A food bank in a hospital?
Yeah, because we were having people admitted with malnutrition-related illnesses, and then they were going home to no food, so they were ping-ponging back and forth. This is in
the sixth richest economy in the world. People are being admitted to hospital with malnutrition-related illnesses, and there's a food bank in the hospital.
Absolutely, and it wouldn't surprise me if there's more food banks in hospitals now. That needs researching more, and it's a culture of fear. Okay, can I just describe what it's like when you go into a Universal Credit Job Centre? You go into most Universal Credit rollout job centres, and you are greeted by security guards, 2 or 3 G4S, and we know what G4S are like. Security guards at the front. And many a time they're taking personal details off people, which they are not allowed to do, but they still do it. They supervise you. They'll tell you that you're not allowed somebody to go in with you when you are. You're allowed to have somebody in because you just are, the law states that you are. They'll watch it. If you get upset because your money's being stopped, for whatever reason, say they've decided they're sanctioning you, say your ESA has been stopped or your PIP has been stopped, then they'll march you out of the job centre. You're not allowed to take hot drinks in, you're not allowed to use a mobile phone, yet they want you to look for work, but you're not allowed to use a mobile phone. The advisor can be as late as they want to be for your appointment, but you can't be 2 minutes late because they can sanction you. So basically, the people that go in the job centre have their life held in that one person who they're seeing their hands, and that is exactly what it's like. I mean, I was speaking to a lady the week before last, and she was absolutely terrified of going past so far in the street outside the job centre, and she said, I can't go near there. And I said, what's the matter? She says, well, she said, my mother died last year, she said, and I was due to sign on the day that your mother was dying, and I asked them if I could postpone the appointment, and they refused, and she had to go in, and her mother was dying, okay, and she missed her mother dying, and she's traumatised, she's absolutely traumatised by that. There was no sympathy. Luckily, we helped her through the appeal process, and she won the appeal because that was seen as unreasonable. But they have to go through that appeal process with no money.
It's like something out of Charles Dickens, as you describe it,
Do you know what? It is, George. This is exactly what it's like. And unless you see it, George, and unless you read about it, you just don't realise, because the government and the right-wing media are doing this really, really good job of declaring everybody as scroungers. Universal credit's working, it's delivering you into work, when actually the only work it delivers you into is 0 hours, temporary contracts, if you've got a contract at all, work. Okay, I was talking to a bloke last week, and he was working, he does agency work, so he'll work 6 weeks at a go or whatever, and then he'll have no work. And every time he has to restart his claim, and every time he's waiting at least 6 weeks. So, yeah, so this man and his wife are actually getting food parcels because they've got nothing. But because they're classed as working, they're falling between the gaps of other organisations.
Now, you say the government are unmoved. What's the next stage in your campaign then?
Well, we're going to carry on. We've got enough facts and figures now to really push with this. One of my next stages in the campaign is to get the opposition, to get Labour, I'm a Labour Party member, to get Labour more interested in this.
Well,
okay?
Corbyn made a very good statement on it today.
Yeah, he did, yeah. And we need to keep that momentum up. We need them to commit to actually, instead of pausing and fixing universal credit, I can tell you this, George, they've postponed and paused universal credit a few times now, and every time they've ignored these pauses. So I promise from the government is not good enough. They won't pause it. They'll just push ahead legislation before the pause comes into place. That's what they do.
Well, they have to take account of the National Audit Office
yes, they do.
report. They'll have to respond to it.
I'm I'm praying that they do. I really am. At the moment, every single Tory minister that I've heard today has denied that it's not working. So I don't know what's going on in Tory HQ at the moment.
Well, look, stay in touch with me, Charlotte, because I'd like to help your campaign. I've got a big social media platforms and so on. I'd like to keep in touch. Thanks very much for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. That's the number to call, 0344 499 1000. You call us, we'll call you back, put you on the radio. Needn't cost you more than a penny or two. You can tweet me at George Galloway, at Talk Radio. Don't forget to at both of us, or you can text me, texting the word talk and then your message to 87222. That'll cost you 25 pence per message on top of your standard network rate. Or you can email me, as Craig has, through the website. Hi, George. If some wee pervert stuck a camera up my kilt, he'd get a good crack on the skull to knock some sense into him, says Craig from Glasgow. I don't, of course, encourage physical violence, Craig, but I understand where you're coming from. And the truth of the matter is that this is a crime almost exclusively committed against women. And it is oftentimes completely without the women's awareness that this crime has been committed. Perhaps until they see it on the internet. Perhaps until someone passes it to them. Hey, is this you in this video that's going around on the internet? It's a disgusting, despicable crime. And it's almost completely inexplicable. I mean, the internet is awash with pornography to which people have consented. This is a crime against women who don't even know necessarily and certainly have not consented. And it would have been a crime already, immediately, if Peeping Tom Chope, the Knight of the Realm, hadn't shouted the one word object in Parliament today, bringing the House of Commons into even further disrepute, bringing the Conservative Party into even further disrepute. It is a national scandal, and in my view, Chope should be disciplined by Theresa May for this action, and it isn't the first time that he has done it. I've known him. He's a weirdo. I've known him for more than 30 years. Here's Charlie in Durness. Go ahead, Charlie.
And Curtis.
In Curtis, I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
Durness, it says here, which probably doesn't even exist. Go ahead, Charlie.
I was thinking that. Yes, aye. So I've got a couple of sort of questions. I've got a 1 point to make about universal credit.
Yeah, go ahead.
I've been on universal credit since, let me think now, December. Now, my situation, Troy, is nowhere near as bad or hasn't been as bad as some people, but I'll just give you a wee insight to how I've went with universal credit. So I'm a single parent to my now 10-year-old daughter. I have been for the last 9 years.
Okay.
And because I had a change of circumstances, I had to claim universal credit. So for the first 6 weeks, it was fine. I mean, there wasn't really any issues. I got an advance payment, which was welcome. But there was an instance, let me think now. So I had tax credits before, working and child tax credits, and I had an overpayment from last year. And one of my payments from universal credit, they took £80 off me. Now that maybe doesn't sound a lot to some people, but
well, if your neck is permanently up, if the water is permanently up to your neck, it only takes a ripple to drown you.
Well, that's it. And I mean, that was 10% off my universal credit payment that they took off me without even asking me about, like, can you afford this or anything like that. Now I work part-time at a local golf club, and I also do volunteer work for the local Scottish Mining Trust in Curtis. But yeah, so that was one instance there. But then the next instance was, there's like what is it called? They basically pay, they check what you've earned between 1 month. And because this was no fault of my own, but because my employer has only got one employee, which was me, his accountant was putting my wages through HMRC every fortnight, although I was getting paid weekly.
Yeah.
So instead of £120 a week, which I was getting, he was putting it through as £240 a fortnight, which created a problem, which created a 6-week month for me. Now, I knew there would be 5-week months, 4 in the year, and so it basically created a 6-week month for me, which was no fault of mine, and to be honest, it was no fault of my employer either, or his accountant. They weren't aware of how that would affect
what the consequences would be for the benefits, yeah.
Well, the consequences were that I basically, instead of getting £850, they basically gave me £640.
Wow.
And that's because it was like I had earned so much.
So you're a classic example of the working poor. For those out there who think we're talking about couch potatoes watching reruns of Love Island, you're bringing up a 10-year-old on your own, and you're working all the hours you can get in a golf club. And when you're not working in the golf club, you're doing volunteer work for the mining trust.
Yes, for ex-miners and their families, yes. And as I said, so what happened there was I had to make an appointment at the local job centre. I took up my pay slips. Now, I didn't get pay slips off my boss because I didn't need them, but they were there for me to get. And then once I got the pay slip, I realised straight away, because he gave me the pay slips and it stated £240 a fortnight, and I thought, right, this is where the problem is. So once I went up to the job centre I made an appointment, I had an interview with them. I showed them my pay slips, which was conflicting to my bank statement, But the bank statement to me is cast iron proof that I was getting £120 a week.
Yeah.
But
Because every
basically I went-
fortnight,
yeah,
240 was going in.
yeah, to the HMRC. Yeah, but actually to me it was only 120 in my bank
Yeah.
pay. But basically what happened there was I was expecting to win that appeal and get £150 extra with my next payment. Well, I didn't win that appeal, and they basically says we have to take HMRC as fact. And I thought, well, fair enough. So what I had to do then was I had to get my boss to then pay me monthly, so we wouldn't have any 5-week months. He changed he got his accountant to put my wages through monthly as well. So I had to go 4 to 5 weeks without any pay whatsoever. Child benefit. Luckily, I had friends to help me for that month. But yeah, and that was that.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable, Charlie.
Yeah.
Now, did you have another point you wanted to make?
I did, yes. I've got one more point. I just want to know your opinion. Now, of course, I think we agree on most things apart from possibly Scottish independence. I know you don't totally disagree with the thought of independence, but what I was going to ask you was the carry-on during the week there with the SNP. Now, of course, try and sort of forget about what they want. They obviously want independence. But their gripe was about this possible power grab. Now, I can understand that certain powers will have to go back to Westminster from the EU. That's totally understandable. But when the Tory party are telling the Scottish Parliament, and it's not just the SNP, it's Labour, the Greens and Liberal Democrats who actually voted against giving consent for this bill. And what we're worried about is these fisheries and agricultural deals that are going to come back, that are going to go to Westminster. They're supposedly saying to us that we're going to get them back within 7 years. I mean...
Well, as the Tory rebels on Brexit found out, the promises made by this government are not worth the paper they're not written on.
Well, that's it. And this is the problem that I think a lot of Scots will have. And as I said, if you take away the fact that the SNP and myself want independence, but this is what a lot of Scots are going to be looking at over the next few years. And that is because they're obviously going to have these powers back to Westminster, devolved powers on the ad, back to Westminster, and eventually they're going to possibly come back to the Scottish Parliament.
Yeah. No, I'm entirely with you on that. And I thought the Speaker handled the entire affair with his usual miserable incompetence. And I thought the SNP were entirely justified in walking out. So we're not in disagreement on that.
Yes, he actually broke parliamentary protocol there because if you actually heard what he said, he actually gave Mr. Blackford the opportunity. Do you want to have the vote now? He didn't want to say it, but he did say it. Do you want to have the vote now, or do you want to have it after PMQs? I'll have it now, please. And then he barred them from the chamber, which to me is total disrespect. Whether it's to the SNP or to Scotland, it's disrespect to the politicians there that are actually trying to. Of course, some of them are just wanting independence, but at the end of the day,
don't get me started on that political midget that sits in the chair of the House of Commons. Charlie, pleasure talking to you again. As always, this is the mother of all talk shows. We're talking universal credit. We're talking Sir Peeping Tom Chope wrecking a move today in Parliament to make upskirting, the indecent photographing of almost always women without their knowledge or consent, oftentimes followed by the spreading of the illicitly obtained image on the internet. We're talking about a centre party, Chuka Umunna. Who'd have thunk it? Well, me actually, and probably anyone else who's ever set eyes on him. Let's take some calls. Gary is in Maidenhead. Go ahead, Gary.
Hello, George.
Hi, sir.
I get whiplash every time I tune into your programme.
Why?
I find myself vehemently agreeing with you on that almost everything you say.
That's fantastic. I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad
Both
to hear
the hypocrisy and folly of those who govern us. Now, there's one thing, however, I cannot agree with you on, and that is Brexit.
Okay.
And the reason is simple. I'd rather throw my lot in with Europe than be a vassal of the Americans.
Yeah, I'm against both.
Okay. I believe there are more smart politicians and people in Europe than there are in the United States.
Well,
I trust them more than I do the Americans.
I'm not sure I'd agree with that, but
maybe not.
But it's not that I just want to be independent in our foreign policy,
Well,
Gary. I don't want to be told what to do by Brussels or Washington.
Well, all this business about loss of sovereignty, I find that a bit strange, because when did Europe ever stop us invading foreign countries?
How do you mean?
Well, we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan. We didn't seek permission to do that from Europe.
We invaded Yugoslavia.
As well.
And in neither of these cases did we have the authority of the United Nations. Both were criminal acts.
Oh, yes, I totally agree. But what I'm saying, the so-called loss of sovereignty,
Oh, yeah.
that's a joke. We do what we want to do when we want to do it.
On war, that's true. But on many other things, that's not true. For example, the European Union requires us, as a matter of law, constitutional law, that we may not run a budget deficit beyond 3%, which is the prescribed limit of our budget deficit. That's a loss of sovereignty. Our government might well decide that in an economic trough, we intend to prime the pump. It's not Bolshevism, it's Keynesianism. But that's illegal under the European Union. Our government might decide that in the face of dumping of cheap and inferior steel from overseas, we're going to protect our own steel industry. The European Union precludes that. We're not allowed to do that as a matter of law. Our government might decide that, let me give you a very good example, that all police cars and ambulances should be built in Britain. We're not allowed to do that. That's precluded by membership of the European Union. I could go on. Believe me, there's a loss of sovereignty across the board. But the most obvious one, and the one that turned the referendum, is that we are required to allow any or all of 350 million EU citizens to come and live and work here. And when they do, from largely, not entirely, but largely, the poorer parts of the European Union, that can have only, it's a matter of fact, nothing to do with race, they're white people, that can have only the effect of depressing wages, forcing up rents, and putting pressure on public services that are already devastated by years, almost a decade, of austerity. That's a loss of sovereignty, isn't it, Gary?
Yes, I understand. Let me just be very briefly with you. My sport over many years has been judo, and was introduced into this country by a number of Japanese masters. And there was a time when it was kind of one single association. There were people like Kenshiro Abe, Kwazumi, the Otanis, and then for some reason or other they decided to split into three: the BJA, BJC, and the AJA. Mm-hmm. Had they stayed together and resolved their differences, our sport would have been that much stronger. I believe the same is true of Europe, that if in fact these things that exist that harm us must harm the other members as well, and that if we were prepared to stay in the Union and reform it from within...
But what's the evidence that there's any reform from within? There's absolutely no evidence of that. All the evidence is to the contrary.
Do you think that the French and the Germans and ourselves want to see things as they are now with a loss of sovereignty?
Germany rules the European Union.
Yeah,
in fact, the European Union is designed to assist German industry and French agriculture. That's its purpose. We weren't even in it. That was the purpose of the European Union and remains its essential purpose. And the European Central Bank is rigged to maintain that balance of economic power and wealth in perpetuity. It's not reformable.
You don't think there's any way it could be reformed? Is that what you're saying?
No, because these are not decisions that are made democratically. These are decisions that are already carved in stone in the European Union's Articles of Association. You know about constitutions. You can't change them. They're written there, and they will never be changed. There is no ability to change them. The euro is designed to assist Germany, because the value of the euro is far lower than any German currency would be. So Germany benefits massively from the value of the euro, which is set by the European Central Bank, which is not subject to any democratic accountability at all.
Well, you know, the will of the people, okay, is something that's often quoted and talked about, okay? My wife and I marched for the only time ever in protest about the war that was looming in terms of the invasion of Iraq, okay? Yeah. Millions of people did that, okay? Nobody, you know, they just ignored it.
Yeah, but we didn't have a referendum on it, Gary. We didn't have a referendum on the war and a promise by the government that however you vote, we will implement it. You're not comparing like with like here. This is apples and oranges.
Yes, you could be right, George.
Gary, I've already talked you out of that foolish error in your ways. Well, I have when you reflect back on it. And anyone listening to it, Gary, already knows I've planted some seeds of doubt in your mind. Let's hear from Peter in Wigan. Go ahead, Peter.
Yeah, hi, George.
Hi.
There's a lot of things I could talk about, but I'll stick on one.
Yeah.
Universal credit.
Yeah.
I wish to compliment the speaker from Trafford.
She was wonderful. And
she was
everyone
wonderful.
should follow her on Twitter.
Yeah.
And I've already put out a tweet to that effect. Yeah.
Yeah, she was excellent. And I just want to tell you, I only feel like I'm about 20, but I am actually 70.
Wow.
In my 70 years, I've never claimed a penny in benefits. I was an elected councillor in Wigan for 6 years, and I never took a penny in expenses in that period. So I'm not.
That'll be why you're an ex-councillor, Peter.
I'm an ex-councillor, yes.
That'll be why.
And I was the ex-leader of the opposition in Wigan with my own party, not any mainstream. But anyway, George, I want to say I believe we should support people in need. Universal credits are costing more to implement than they save.
Yeah, I mean, that's the killer fact. That's the killer fact which the National Audit Office has zeroed in on.
Yeah. It's nothing more than a, what do you call it, ideological campaign to demonise the poor and to make out that these people don't want to work and all the rest of it.
Well, it was invented by Ian Duncan Smith, after all. The clue is in the name.
Yeah. You know, and I know some people who are on benefits, and they are people who've got severe disabilities, and this vicious, nasty campaign by the Tories is depriving them of urgently needed funding and making them wait to get their money and take out loans and all the rest of it. But I want to say one more thing, George, before you cut me off.
Yeah, quickly, yeah. We've only got 50 seconds.
In Wigan, Labour have supported the Tories to the hilt. They implemented, I forget his name now, what was it? Lord Freud, the Tory Lloyd Freud, and there's a famous picture, I won't mention his name, of the Wigan Labour camp leader with him, and they implemented the universal credit 6 months earlier than the rest of the country.
Wow.
And
shame on them.
Sorry?
Shame on them.
Shame on them, absolutely. In my view, it's nothing more than an attack on the poorest and most vulnerable people in our society.
That's a good point to end on, Peter, as indeed we must. That's Peter, former leader of the opposition in the Wigan Council. A very, very wise man. This is George Galloway. This is the mother of all talk shows. Now, Wera Hobhouse is a Liberal Democrat MP for Bath. She brought the private members' bill to make upskirting a criminal offence along with other voyeurism offences. The government indicated their support for it, but a member of the governing party wrecked it. In the week that they banned the use of the term spotted dick in the restaurant, replacing it with spotted Richard. Nobody spotted Sir Peeping Tom Chope. And up the honourable member popped and wrecked a bill that surely would have had the support of every right-thinking person in the land. The hero of the hour is Wera, Hobhouse MP, and she joins me now. Wera, thanks for that.
That's all right.
Now, just by shouting one word, it's a pity we couldn't stop other things by just shouting one word. This Tory MP has wrecked your bill, at least for the time being. Tell us, first of all, how you felt when you saw him commit this act.
Well, I was jolly annoyed. To be quite honest, we had been warned that it might be happening. So I tried in the last 24 hours, or, since yesterday afternoon, to talk to him and sort of understand why it was, because we had had such widespread support from everybody else, including 2 government ministers, who I thought originally would have been the ones who would have objected to it, because that can happen, with these bills from backbenchers. The government doesn't feel ready, so they get the government whip to object to it. But in this case, everybody was on board. We had widespread support. I think even Jeremy Corbyn had sort of written to all his MPs to back it. So, we had absolutely everybody lined up. And then there's one guy, it turned out yesterday. In fact, there was a group of 3 that might have done it, but it turned out it was this one guy who was not going to support it. So I tried to persuade him not to do it, because I thought it wouldn't look good. And indeed, it looks terrible for him now. But he was unpersuadable. He turned away from me. He said he was going to object to it. So when he actually said object, I'd known for about an hour that that's what he was going to do. So I was furious, but I had been warned for an hour or so beforehand.
He has form on this, as do the other members of the threesome to whom you referred. They have some weird libertarian take on life. That the country doesn't need more laws, and something that would have sent a powerful message that this vile practice was unacceptable in our country was just grist to his mill, I think.
Yes, and I think he completely misjudged the mood in the country, so sort of post-Weinstein and all that, that offences that are particularly geared towards women, who are the most targeted group here, and some girls as young as 10 have been victims of this crime, and that we wanted to protect them is absolutely the right thing to do, and he's got just entirely out of touch here.
How widespread is this offence in your view?
Well, we don't know, because it's a hidden crime.
Because it isn't an offence, yeah. Let me rephrase it. How many people, and how often do you think these things are happening?
Oh, it's happening on a daily basis. It happens on schools and buses, on escalators. And some people do it just for a bit of a prank, which is still, I hope, is going to be an offence because it's not that funny. And some people go and do it for sexual gratification. So the bill was going to capture a range of motivations, and the sentence would have been, the highest where it was sort of sexual gratification. But also it would have warned off all sorts of young people in schools who think it's a bit of a joke. And it would have sent a warning sign that, this isn't a joke. It's aimed at humiliating and aimed at distressing, and it's just not on.
It's voyeurism, isn't it? It's in the same family of offences as someone looking through your bedroom window when you're getting ready for bed in the evening.
Yeah, it's a range of offences. I mean, so the defender of keeping the status quo said, well, there's prosecution possible under, the Public Decency or Public Decency Act, where, if there is a third person who sees it, you can be prosecuted. But we wanted to make the bill centered around the victim. There's a perpetrator, there's a victim. It doesn't need a third person to have seen it. It is as simple as that. And that was a change in the law that we wanted to do. And in fact, in Scotland, since 2009, that law already exists and has been actually quite successful in deterring people from doing this. People might wonder, why in Scotland first, but it's gender neutral, and it's meant to be gender neutral in this country as well. But we wanted to make sure that women or any victim are protected in the same way as they're already protected in Scotland.
Now, did you say he turned away from you, but he had earlier spoken to you? What were his reasons for objecting to the bill?
Well, it's his reasons that he has, that he cites for objecting to any private members' bills, that he thinks it should be debated during government time, and that the government, if it wanted to take new laws onto their statute books, or even amendments like this one, it should be debated, and they should give it the time. And that's fair enough. And, you could say that, but in this case, it is such a small amendment to the existing law already. We had to discuss it with the Minister of Justice.
And so consensual. I mean, who in their right mind would oppose it?
Yeah, I know. And if he had wanted to debate it and actually had come to me and said, look, Wera, I've got a few issues here, this, that, and the other, but he just did not want to engage. I mean, we had been running drop-in sessions. We had been running enough. We've been highlighting that this is coming long enough for him to get engaged. In fact, I sit with him on the Brexit Select Committee. He could have called me and so after a meeting said, Wera, can we discuss this? But just objecting to it for the hell of it, it's just not good enough. And his argument, it hasn't got enough debating time, it's just spurious. It was just being bloody-minded.
Now, it looks extremely bad for him, but it also looks extremely bad for the Conservative Party because he's a Conservative MP. There must be a possibility that the government will now do something to try and deal with this. They must have a guilty conscience on it this evening.
Well, to be fair to Christopher Chope's Conservative colleagues, it has to be said that they have actually been good. They were sitting there. Actually, quite a lot of members had especially come into this chamber and did say shame, and they felt very embarrassed. And they had, I think, also tried to stop him, but unsuccessfully. And for too long, he's just got away with it, and he just didn't see it coming. So his Conservative colleagues are embarrassed, but they, to be fair to them, had also supported this bill, and he's very, very isolated within his own party. But the whips have said to me when we discussed it yesterday that, they couldn't do anything about it and they would ignore them anyway and all the rest of it. So having his fingers burnt this time, that he's really been, seen as, the isolated guy that he is in his own party, maybe it will give him a big warning sign. And when the bill comes back,
he wrecked another private member's bill an hour later.
Well, he's got good form in it, and what really made me angry about it in the last 24 hours is that a lot of people say, oh yeah, he does it all the time, and then they shrug their shoulders, and good legislation is just being kicked out of anything, out of the debating chamber because Christopher Chope doesn't like private members' bills, and the way in which people have just sort of put up with it for a long time, I do not understand. I'm a new member of Parliament. This process is just balmy, I think, but nobody seems to have the guts or the will to actually fight it and say, look, this process is just not good enough and it's not fit for purpose, and we should really look at the process of this. But that's for another day. The first thing I want to achieve is to make sure on the 6th of July nobody objects to a small amendment in the law that makes perfect sense and would protect victims across the board, and in England and Wales as well as in Scotland.
Well, the best of luck with that, and well done with your bill. Wera Hobhouse, Liberal Democrat MP for Bath, whose noble efforts to outlaw this vile practice, growing practice of upskirting, the furtive taking of photographs up women's skirts and dresses, and quite often spreading them across the internet. I'm George Galloway. This is the mother of all talk shows. 0344 499 1000. That's the number to call, as Richard in North Berwick has. Richard, welcome to the show.
Hi, George.
Hi.
I'm actually not from North Berwick. I'm from Haddington.
Okay. North Berwick's close enough for the purposes.
Yeah. I'm a long-time listener. I love listening to you and Mike Graham. I've
Thanks,
listened
mate.
to you for ages.
Thanks.
Yeah, about this upskirting thing.
Yeah.
I think it's truly disgusting.
Shocking. How would you? 10-year-old schoolgirls
I'm
having filthy
I'm
men
old school,
furtively
that women
photographing
should be,
them.
honoured. You know what I mean?
Sorry, say that again.
I'm old school. The way I've been brought up is to honour and respect women.
Exactly.
And I think it's like disgusting. And you know what I think? I think it should be like a criminal offence. But I think it should be like they should be put on a sex offenders list as well.
There should be what?
They should be put on a sex offenders list.
Well, it is a sexual offence.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I mean, there's no doubt that it's a sexual offence. I mean, whether some people say it's for a joke, ultimately it is the sexual humiliation of a woman. The woman is the victim of a male act of sexual humiliation.
That's right.
And that there's no place for that. That has to be a crime. And the person involved has to be properly punished and shamed for having done it. Otherwise, as you heard from the MP there, it's spreading in schools.
Mm-hmm.
Boys are doing it, and thus getting on the first rung of the ladder of treating girls and then women as sexual objects to be degraded and humiliated.
That's right.
It's completely unacceptable.
Yes,
and what is equally unacceptable, Richard, is that some spotted dick, anyone, can just shout one word in Parliament and ruin a carefully crafted and piloted effort to change the law.
That's ridiculous. I mean,
and he done it. He's done it on Hillsborough. He's done it on any number of things.
That Conservative politician should be sacked right now for that.
Well, I think that's right. I think that Sir Christopher Chope should resign. He should resign from Parliament for what he did today.
Yeah, how can a politician who's maybe like running the land stand up and say, "Oh no, this is wrong"?
Look, he's a weirdo. He does that.
Well,
he does that. He's been doing it for decades. He used to do it regularly on a Friday in front of my own eyes.
Well,
just because he can. Just because he's got the power to shout one word, object, and wreck the woman's bill.
Yeah.
And he's made an enemy of every woman in the land. He's made an enemy of every woman in the land and every man in the land that respects and honours women.
That's right. Exactly.
The Tories better act on this, you know. Theresa May better act on this.
But she won't. She's too weak. This isn't about... She's too interested in Brexit and the NHS. She wouldn't even bother about this.
OK, Richard, thanks for your call. I think we're both hot under the collar about this, and rightly so, and I think a lot of people are. The Red Resistance says, GG, like or loathe Trump, at least he had the sense to take North Korea up on the offer, rejected by the Nobel-winning Obama, to trade nuclear disarmament for the halting of antagonistic war games. Incidentally, during his time, Obama turned 2 wars into 7. Well, you don't need to persuade me about the suave venality of President Barack Obama, who dropped 3 bombs every hour of every day, night, and year of his 8 years of presidency. Of course, he did it in a nice suit. He did it whilst crooning Sam Cooke, but he still did it. And he didn't close Guantanamo Bay as he'd promised that he would. He took America into still further wars, though he was on the anti-war marches with me in Washington when he was still a junior congressman. He is responsible for terror in Libya and the breaking up of that country with all its consequences, not least on the mass movement of poor migrants drowning in the Mediterranean Sea. And one of the less understandable aspects of politics today is that the most liberal people are vituperating most viciously against Donald Trump because instead of having a war in Korea, he decided on face-to-face diplomatic negotiations. I come back to The Guardian that took huge sums of Saudi Arabian money in paid adverts for the tyrant Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, welcoming him to Britain just a couple of months ago. Yet, even in its football coverage, cannot contain its vicious churlishness about Russia and the World Cup, which denounced Robbie Williams. Turns out to be a fan of mine. I didn't know that before I'd started speaking. Sorry about the Shostakovich reference. Robbie, comrade Robbie. The liberal hate of Putin and Russia is even in their football coverage. And The Guardian and the liberals in America and Britain, that's a small L liberal, by the way, denounced Trump for what any sane person could see was a substantial achievement of getting the North Koreans to the negotiating table and their commitment to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and the ending of a 65-year-old war between North and South Korea. Any sane person would say, well done, the big orange man. But not the liberals. Their hatred of Russia and of Trump is way too great for that. Here's Colin in Oldbury on the line. Go ahead, Colin.
Hello, George. I'm starting to make an habit of talking to you again.
Well, it's a great pleasure for me. I hope it is for you. Go ahead.
It certainly is. First of all, just very quickly before I get on to this upskirting thing, my daughter was asking, how is George? I said, you should tune in and find out, shouldn't you?
Exactly. Everyone needs to get one more listener. Colin, if everybody gets one more listener, my job here at Talk Radio is secure.
I've got two daughters that used to go to bed listening to you at night when I used to have them on a weekend.
Fantastic.
And they used to call him Uncle George.
How wonderful. That's lovely.
Right.
I love those Friday nights, Saturday nights on Talk
Yeah,
Radio. I love them.
Lots of memories.
All right, Paul. Go ahead.
Right, we've got something nasty going on with the upskirting, and I'm thinking...
Isn't it vile? You've got daughters,
I've
got daughters. It's a vile idea that some pervert is taking pictures up their skirts and sticking it on the internet.
I've got a way around it for you.
Tell me.
But here's the other thing. First of all, that bloke strikes me as, like you say, a weirdo.
He is a weirdo,
I'd like someone to get into go and investigate his computer, see what he might have stashed for a start. And then
of course, even cabinet ministers have been guilty of that. But I should say, there's no evidence whatsoever that Christopher Chope has ever walked on the wild side.
Well, I think he might be found out for something soon enough.
Well, we shouldn't say it. We shouldn't say that.
Well, I'm going to, because I find it bloody disgraceful.
We also invited him on the programme, by the way, but for understandable reasons, he declined.
Yeah, it's like the other MP that refused the woman that the life-saving drug for her child earlier in the week. James was spitting feathers over that. Here's the thing. This is an invasion of privacy, surely.
Oh, it's the very least of it. It's a peeping Tom offence.
Yeah,
and you go to jail for that. You go to jail for being a peeping Tom.
An invasion of privacy, is there not a law against that?
Yeah, but it'll be a higher bar, and the punishment will be less. It should be treated as a sexual offence, and that's what the private members' bill sought to do.
Can they not sort of go with the invasion of privacy now and then try and work that new law in through that?
Well, no doubt. But I think if you Googled how many prosecutions there have been for invasion of privacy and what the tariff was, you'll find it's pitifully small. That's my guess.
Well, I'm hoping they've got to do something about that, because, I mean, if ever I could...
Well, the Tories should add the woman, Wera Hobhouse. They should add her bill in a truncated form as a clause to one of their other bills going through the House of Commons at the moment. I think
Bill
Theresa May now owes that to the women of Britain. And Chope should be sacked. Why would she want to have such a man as one of our members of Parliament?
Weakness.
Weakness is the word.
It's weakness. Yeah. Well, I'll let you carry on.
Pleasure talking to you, Colin. Thanks for that. And my best to your lovely daughters. Russell Brake says it's foolhardy, foolhardy of the PC, BBC, Dimbleby and the rest of the motley crew to risk venturing into Novichok-riddled Russia, isn't it? After all the negative remarks they and May's party said and still do about Putin. So watch out when you eat and drink and keep your hands off any door handles. Hassan says, had there been no SNP, would Jeremy Corbyn be the PM? Well, of course, unless Labour wins more seats, they're not going to be the governing party. And that's one of the reasons, only one of them, that I'm against the SNP, because I want to see a Labour government for the whole island of Britain. Marie, my old friend, says the vile Guardian has the cheek to talk about dictators. The Ukrainian fascist leader, Andrit Parubi, was brought to the Scottish Parliament yesterday. My goodness. When did foreign affairs become one of the devolved matters for the Scottish Parliament, Marie? I need to look more into that. Mountain Man says massive unemployment in Spain. Ronaldo convicted of tax fraud, hasn't put him off his game tonight, to the tune of £16.4 million and 2 years suspended jail and pay the money back. Are they having a laugh? Proves the old adage that there's only two measures of money, not enough or none at all. This is a reference to Ronaldo, who was today fined €18.8 million and sentenced to 2 years in prison, suspended for tax evasion. But he's now on a hat-trick. Peter says, Mr. G, please stop giving Theresa advice. She might end up with a manifesto. Well said, Peter in Glasgow. Tyler Durden says, Chuka Umunna's party should be called Backsides Together. Weird name. Very, very good. Two cheeks of the same backside. Now, I've known Mark Seddon for many decades, although he still looks as young as he ever did. He was the editor of Tribune. He stood as a Labour parliamentary candidate. He went to New York and became the speechwriter for the Secretary General of the United Nations. That's no small position. He's now a visiting professor, both in England and in the United States, I think at Columbia University in New York. He knows the Labour Party inside out. And when I saw his quite excellent article in The Guardian today on the Palestine-Israel conflict, it reminded me that he was the man I needed to talk to this evening about the New Statesman scoop that Chuka Umunna has emerged as the leading figure in a putative new party, a breakaway from the Labour Party, and somebody called Chris Leslie, who will not be known to many of you, but who is another leading Blairite, has been given the job of pulling together the putative manifesto. And Mark's on the line now. Mark Seddon, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, George.
Now, the New Statesman is the house journal these days of the Blairite tendency. I doubt if they've got this wrong. They've got the scoop. What do you think of it?
Well, I am kind of surprised that more people aren't reporting on it. Now, it's either happening or it's not. If it's happening, then many more journalists would probably be in the know, because they're probably, if they're in the lobby,
they might be in the party. They might be in the new party.
Well, exactly. That all happened before. I mean, George, you'll remember there was a breakaway in the early 1980s called the SDP.
Very vividly.
Roy Jenkins was its leader. You went on to defeat him, of course, and
That's
did us
right.
all a great favour in Glasgow Hill Head.
Yeah.
But the thing is, I think we really look. This is a story in the New Statesman. I would assume if they're publishing it, they must be fairly sure of their facts. Well, we need to hear from Chuka Umunna. I would have thought the Labour chief whip, Nick Brown, would like to hear from Chuka Umunna as to whether he is forming this new party. Because if he is, then he would presumably have to be booted out of the existing one, which is the Labour Party.
Well, he has denied it, but then he would say that, wouldn't he? The founders of the SDP all denied it until they no longer denied it. And the journalists who were in league with them, like Polly Toynbee and her then husband, an eminent journalist whose name has temporarily escaped me.
Oh, Hugo Young. Young.
No, I don't think it was him. But he was also a fellow traveller. Much of the liberal journalistic class were in on the SDP betrayal, which kept Margaret Thatcher in power for an entire decade.
Yes, I mean, these again are rumours, but really, I mean, given that the fare of Westminster lobby journalists is very often rumour, I'm kind of surprised we're not hearing rather more about all of this, because I'm not as connected as I used to be, but I have heard from one or two people who are very, very closely connected to what people call the Remainer camp, people who, in both main parties, who weren't happy about the referendum result and are trying to have another one, that they are trying to set up political parties, one of the centre-left and one of the centre-right, essentially to split both parties. Now, if that is true, then I'm kind of surprised that we haven't heard more about it. Of course, it may not be true, but it's not beyond the wit of Fleet Street to get to the bottom of it. But by the way, George, I mean, I missed it, but because I just came on as you were beginning to talk about it. But if this is true, that Chuka Umunna's party is going to be called Back Together, which is what I read.
Yes.
I mean, I'm wondering, because I looked that up, and I'm Back Together, as you'll probably recall, was a disco combo track by Roberta Flack and Donna Hathaway. So I hope he's checked the copyright on this.
A popular beat combo, my lord. It's of course, potentially damaging to both the mainstream parties, Conservative and Labour. It certainly was extremely damaging to Labour in the 1980s. But when you think about it, Mark, it's entirely logical, isn't it? You have a phalanx of 100 at least, in my view, Labour MPs who hate their own leader, hate everything he stands for, love the European Union, love NATO, love the bomb, love neoliberal economics. It's very difficult for them, and it's entirely dishonest of them to continue to masquerade as Labour supporters, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, I don't know about that number. I mean, some of the people who are close to the trade unions think it's more like about 30 or whatever. But it is clear that there have been a group of Labour MPs, new Labour MPs, I suppose you'd call them, who are very close to the Blairite project. I would actually call them Labour's circular firing squad, because ever since Jeremy Corbyn was elected, they seem to have done their best either to get rid of him or try and do their best to damage the Labour Party's chances in Parliament. And yeah, well, it might be logical for them if they really don't like it, but of course the reason why none of these people have pressed the trigger, as it were, is because they're well aware of where this all goes, because minority parties that start off with a whole load of media support and what have you don't get a great deal of traction, but as you were saying, what they do is keep existing governments in power. And for what it's worth, I was up in Doncaster yesterday, and I was in Hatfield and Stainforth and Armthorpe. All these are all ex-pit villages which have never recovered from the Thatcher pit closure programme. I don't think for a minute people there are thinking about London-centric politicians who are going to set up parties called, I don't know, Back Together, Renew, Come Together, whatever nonsense it might be. What I suspect they want is action from the Labour government to get proper jobs back again. None of this frippery that people get excited about in Westminster.
Well, I'll tell you why I hold to my 100 number. There was what I think is the classic, the facsimile offence on a motion by Labour to merely suspend selling arms to Saudi Arabia, whilst investigations about potential humanitarian disasters that were being caused in Yemen took place. And there was a very well organized, with its own whips, effort to have a mass abstention on a 3-line whip in defiance of Corbyn. And that number was above 100.
Well, I'm sure you're right. And you see, that is an intolerable situation for a political party. It does tell you a great deal about the fluidity also and the breakdown of discipline within the political parties, but also how much the Labour Party changed under Tony Blair. Because don't forget, an awful lot of these MPs that have been against Corbyn are the ones that were parachuted in by Tony Blair over the tops of the ordinary constituency party members. The idea that 10, 20 years ago, Labour MPs would be queuing up to try and defend the indefensible. I mean, you've got the Secretary-General of the United Nations saying quite clearly that if the Saudis and the UAE, United Arab Emirates, proceed in what they're planning to do, that they could be in breach of international law. Now, that sort of thing you would never have had Labour MPs queuing up to rebel over in favour of it.
No, I mean, you might have had one or two that had had a brown envelope or who'd had a freebie, a jolly in Saudi Arabia, but it would have been one or two. It wouldn't have been 100 plus. And that's what it was. But more recently, i.e. this week, again, getting on for 100, Labour MPs again defied Corbyn's 3-line whip because their love of the European Union is greater than their love of Labour Party unity. And so I think the number is several score, to say the least. And if they were to break away now, in the absence of a general election, they would take, say, let's compromise, say they were 75 off of the number of Jeremy Corbyn's MPs, would change the arithmetic, change the dynamics in the House of Commons very considerably.
Well, that's all true. But do you know what I think is the difference between now and perhaps the early 1980s? And of course, this is hypothetical. We don't know what. But if this potentially were to happen, I can't see out there in the country there'd be much interest or support for it in the way that there was for the SDP at the time. The SDP were doing quite well in by-elections and what have you.
Yes.
The difference is now is that the Labour Party is actually what the London media tend to ignore is that the Labour Party, almost uniquely in Europe, has come back to life. It's the biggest political party of the left in Europe. There are 600,000 members. I mean, I went along to a Labour Party meeting where I live in Tory rural Buckingham last night. There was about 1,000 members in this constituency. The last time I looked, there were about 100. These things matter. So, you know, if these MPs were tempted to run off and try and form another party, they run up against something quite solid, which is out there in the real country. People who are interested and active are involved and in big numbers. So I don't think there'd be much support for them.
Mark Seddon knows what he's talking about. Sceptical, I think we can say, that there will be, and if there is, that it will succeed, a breakaway from the Labour Party, whether led by Chuka Umunna, as the New Statesman has revealed in a scoop which is being completely ignored in the mainstream media. I wonder why. 0344 499 1000, that's the number to call. We'll call you right back. We're talking the upskirting outrage. Christopher Chope apparently has just claimed that he didn't know what upskirting was. Well, that's very unlikely to be true, because not only was he sitting there whilst the member was moving the bill, he had prior conversations with her, at which point he turned away and didn't want to debate it. So that excuse cannot possibly be true. It's quite likely that he is shaken to the core by the public backlash against the action that he took, in which case he can personally make sure that the bill does get a second reading. When it comes back to the House of Commons in July, he can lasso the other members of the Three Musketeers who sit together, right-wing libertarian weirdos who make a habit of wrecking good private members' bill in Parliament just because they can. Russ is in Birkenhead and he's on the line. Go ahead, Russ.
How you doing, George? Yeah.
Yeah, good, mate.
Been listening to you for a long time, and I agree with many of your points.
Thank you.
But I was a bit concerned that you didn't mention Mr. Peter Tatchell, his protest yesterday, and he got locked up because of his protest about the LGBTQ issue in Russia.
He was arrested. He wasn't locked up. He's walking freely now.
I heard him say, George, on a different radio station, admittedly, that he was locked up only for maybe an hour and a half, but he was locked up.
Well, I'm not sure an hour. When you get arrested in Red Square, I'm not sure an hour and a half qualifies as locked up. But he was arrested. He was arrested.
He's making, though?
Yeah, but Russ, I'll let you in. He was arrested for breaking the law, as anybody is in any country when they break the law. You're not allowed to have protests in Red Square. And secondly, you're not allowed to have protests during the World Cup because public order during the World Cup is extremely important to the host country.
An example of a totalitarian state, surely, George.
No. You wouldn't be.
It is,
you're
George,
not,
come on.
Well, let me shoot that down right away, Russ.
Go on, then.
You're not allowed to protest outside Buckingham Palace. True or not?
Well, you're saying it, and I assume you know what you're talking about.
I do know what I'm talking about. You're not allowed to protest in front.
Mr. Tatchell,
Russ, let's deal with this point first. You're not allowed to protest outside Buckingham Palace. The police would very quickly arrest you if you persisted and move you on.
In his endeavours.
Tell me what his endeavours are.
Well, he wants equality, especially in countries like Russia.
Absolutely. Why especially in countries called Russia? Russia is you're talking about gay rights, Russ, Russia's far more gay-friendly than South Carolina. Let me promise you that.
Of course.
Than Mississippi. Let me promise you that.
I've got no sympathy for South Carolina, Mississippi, or any other.
All right. But you said particularly Russia. I wondered why you didn't say particularly South Carolina.
Well, I say particularly Russia because you when you first came on the air just after 7.
Yeah, I spoke up for Russia.
You praised Russia.
Yeah. I'm praising Russia's World Cup. And by the way,
no.
By the way, it's 3-3.
You praise Russia in general all the time.
I do. I praise what's praised. Russ, stop speaking. Russ, stop speaking. Don't keep throwing accusations and not let me answer them, because this conversation will go on, I promise you. I'll let you back in. But every time you make a baseless accusation against me, you need to let me, the host of the show, respond to it. I praise that which is praiseworthy in Russia and condemn that which is condemnable in Russia, as I do in any country. Now, if you'd started out by politely asking me the question, do I support the policy of the Russian government on homosexuality, I would have told you, no, I do not. I condemn it. I condemn it because it is exactly the same, almost word for word, as Margaret Thatcher's famous anti-gay legislation, which I not just opposed, but spoke against in Parliament long before it was the policy of the Labour opposition so to do. So, if you're asking me, do I support the cause of equality for gay people in Russia? I absolutely do.
Yeah, and Mr. Tatchell does not only support gay rights, he supports humanitarian causes all over the world.
Well, tell me about them. Tell me about them.
Zimbabwe is another example.
Yeah, it's funny he chooses. Isn't it funny that Peter Tatchell chooses the same countries that the mainstream establishment in Britain and in the West are targeting? Isn't that a coincidence to you?
And I'm sure
of all the countries in Africa, with human rights problems, why did he fasten on Zimbabwe? Of all the
Yeah,
countries in the
there are other
world,
countries, of course.
of all the countries in the world that don't like gay people, why did he fasten on Russia, which has
don't think they
exactly
just
the
like
same
gay
law,
people. They're
the
phobic
same
about them,
law,
aren't they?
Russ, on gay issues as Britain had just 20-odd years ago?
Well, we've had the...
Russ, you know there's a gay club.
1967.
Russ,
1967 was the...
Russ, you maybe don't know this, but I know it because I've been in it. You know there's a gay pub 50 metres away from Red Square?
I wouldn't be surprised.
Well, you should be surprised because you're trying to paint Russia as a hell for gay people.
I'm not. I'm not painting it that.
It's only
putting
50
words in my
yards
mouth.
away. Russ.
You're putting words in my mouth, George.
Well, I think most people will have heard the tone, and if I have misrepresented your tone, I apologise for that. I thought it was your case that Russia was really bad for gay rights.
Well,
otherwise, why is Tatchell there?
World,
Otherwise, why is Tatchell there?
I mean, Iran is another example.
Well, but look, don't keep touring the horizon.
Why can't I name other countries?
Well, you can name any countries you like, and we'll talk about them. But right now, we're talking about Peter Tatchell in Russia. I'm telling you, I have been in a gay bar with the village people throbbing out YMCA within earshot of Lenin's tomb.
I'm sure that was highly enjoyable for you, George.
It was massively enjoyable. Massively.
Well,
I really enjoyed it. But it doesn't quite fit the stereotype that you're seeking to imbue the listeners with this evening.
I don't seek to stereotype people, George, why
are you so gung-ho?
Maybe some people want
Why are you so gung-ho for Peter Tatchell's protest in Red Square, 50 yards from a gay pub?
Well, because it's 50-odd years since the gay legislation was repealed in Britain, and I think it's appropriate that you say 50 in this context.
What? It's 50 years since what?
The repealing of the homosexuality laws in the UK, is it not? Or 51 years, actually.
Yeah, but Margaret Thatcher reintroduced anti-homosexual.
A hateful law.
You do know that gay relations are illegal in a substantial number of parts of the United States, don't you?
Yes, of course I do.
Why isn't Tatchell protesting in the United States?
Well, maybe he should.
Gay relations are not illegal in Russia. There's a gay pub off Red Square. Aren't there better targets for Peter Tatchell? Or does he only show up for a protest at people who are already being targeted by Western governments? That's my point.
They wish to attack people. There are lots of thugs, shall we call them, in
I
Russia.
could take you to the South Bank in London this evening, where there are a lot of gay-bashing, homophobic thugs looking to bash gay people. Why is that a Russian? Why is that a Russian thing?
They're all over the world, George. They're all over the world.
Well, exactly.
We know that.
So why are you tackling Russia? Why are you picking on Russia?
Because when you first came on the air, you were praising Russia for various things.
Okay, let's find agreement then. Let's find agreement. There's gay bashing in Russia, as there is in London. Probably still more in other parts of Britain.
What about Uganda? That's a prime example.
I'm speaking now. There's the same anti-gay propaganda in Russia as there was in Thatcher's Britain. But gay rights are not illegal in Russia as they are in substantial parts of the United States. And there's a gay pub off Red Square. I'm condemning the anti-gay laws that exist in any part of the world. And the worse the measure of repression of gay rights, the more I will protest it. Starting at the top with the most repressive and eventually coming down to those where there isn't actually much repression at all. That's the difference between me and Peter Tatchell, and it's a difference between me and you. Russ in Birkenhead, thank you for that call. You got my blood going, as did the 3-3 result at full time for Portugal, my team. Portugal, Cristiano Ronaldo 3, Spain 3 was the final result. So we'll be getting a flood of new listeners after the news. Now, the Miami 5, as I said earlier, but we'll repeat for those joining us after the end of the football, were 5 Cuban patriots whose job was to monitor, to disrupt, and if possible to thwart anti-Cuban terrorism emanating from Miami and South Florida, its epicenter in the United States, during a period in which we were supposed to be involved in a war on terror. The United States not only merely allowed terrorists to operate from their country as long as their target was Cuba, they imprisoned for 15 years those who were seeking to disrupt them. The kind of terrorism I'm talking about is serious. Hijacking of civilian airliners, murder on a big scale, bombs in tourist facilities, hotel foyers, with the potential to murder and maim innocent tourists, including from here in the United Kingdom. The man who's emerged as the leader of the Miami 5 prisoners is now a member of parliament in Cuba and is, in fact, in charge of the coordination of Cuba solidarity campaigns all over the world. And he's on a tour of Britain. In fact, he's now in Liverpool, where he's just been speaking at a meeting. So we're lucky to get this opportunity to talk to Fernando Gonzalez, Cuban MP. Fernando, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Galloway, and thanks your audience.
Now, just tell the audience, would you, what it was that you were doing, why you were doing it, and why the United States, far from helping you, punished you most severely.
Well, Mr. Galloway, as you explained to the audience just before myself coming in on the show, is the fact that during decades, the extreme right terrorists from Cuban origins in South Florida have been carrying out terrorist attacks against Cuba, violent attacks against not only the island of Cuba, but Cuban offices in different countries of the world. They bombed Cubana airline offices in Mexico. They bombed a Cubana airliner flying from Barbados to Havana, where 73 innocent people died. They have been carrying out that kind of attacks for years, for decades, in fact, since the triumph of the revolution in 1959. So Cuba needed to have eyes and ears in South Florida because the United States authorities, who were supposed to pursue and know about those plans and thwart those plans and incarcerate those planning those attacks, never did it. So the only way that Cuba had to save the lives of Cubans and non-Cubans was having individuals in South Florida being able to know what the plans were, where the weapons came from, where the finances for those plans were coming from, and being aware of what was going on, what the ideas and the plans were against Cuba and against individuals anywhere in the world that were related to Cuba.
Now,
so
you presumably advanced this as your defense against the charges, which would seem to me an unvanquishable defense, to say to the judge, we were trying to stop terrorism, bombing aircraft, bombing hotels, bombing airline offices, risking the lives of Cubans in Cuba and abroad, but also risking the lives of anybody who happened to be in the Cubana office in Mexico or who happened to be in a hotel in Cuba on holiday. Why was that defense not successful?
Well, the defense was not successful because the trial was held in Miami, and there is so many years of prejudice against Cuba and anything that has to do with the Cuban government and the Cuban people in South Florida and in Miami in particular, that it was impossible to find 12 jurors that would be impartial. And that's an argument that we made before the judge, and the argument was never successful. The judge ruled in several times against us having our trial in a different city away from Miami. So for us, it was really a matter not of winning or not. It was a matter of presenting the facts and presenting the history. We knew we didn't stand a chance in Miami because of those pervasive community prejudice against anything related to the Cuban government and the Cuban people.
Now, Donald Trump is a bit of a throwback in many ways, and one of those is on Cuba, because the previous president, Obama, had begun to relax, not lift, and certainly not lift the embargo on Cuba, but relax some of the aspects of the United States' ongoing, not too covert war to try and bring down the Cuban government. Trump has overturned those and turned the clock back. Tell us about that, would you?
Well, it's obvious that this administration, this U.S. administration, is trying to roll back all that was advanced during the last 2 years of the Obama administration. I would say that there were agreements that were reached between the Cuban government and the American government during the last 2 years of the Obama administration regarding law enforcement and drug interdiction and cooperation on immigration and other issues that were important in advancing towards someday normalizing the relations between the two countries. The economic area was the area in which less advances were made. The blockade was still in place when Obama left the administration. There was no success in the effort to lift the embargo, even though President Obama publicly stated that he was very much against that blockade, because the blockade needs to be lifted by Congress because it's law. Now this current administration has been trying to roll back those advances on any other areas, and it's been trying to enforce even strongly the regulations regarding the embargo, what they call the embargo, that is really a blockade, an economic blockade, and even more than that, even farther away than that is an economic war against Cuba. And that's what this administration has been doing, trying to enforce each and every one of the rules regarding the embargo and tightening the blockade against Cuba.
And yet the same President Trump has just gone to Singapore, embraced Kim Jong-Un, the leader of North Korea, and stated that this kind of diplomatic face-to-face diplomacy is far preferable to war and the threat of war. If he can embrace North Korea, why can't he shake hands with Cuba?
Well, first of all, I think it's a very hopeful development, the fact that the President of the United States and the President of North Korea have been able to meet and reach an agreement, and is hopeful for the world and for what it could mean for world stability and peace. It's also an example of what you say. Well, if you're able to do that, why not meet with Cuba and go down the same path of negotiation and understanding between each other? I mean, there's the issue in the Korean Peninsula is far more complicated and far more complex than whatever the
Exactly,
the
yeah,
government.
exactly.
What,
I mean,
right.
you don't have nuclear weapons. You're not involved in a 65-year war with the United States, at least on an official level, and you're much closer to the United States than North Korea is. Or maybe that's the problem, Fernando.
Well, the thing is that it seems like the president of the United States is under the influence, to call it on a mild way, under the influence of some of the extremists from the right wing in the Republican Party of Cuban origins, representing those in South Florida, and that seems to be what is happening. He's feeling the pressure of the Marco Rubios and the Diaz-Balards coming from South Florida, representing in Congress the extreme right-wing Cuban American community in South Florida.
Now, how did your meeting go in Liverpool this evening?
Oh, very, very well. I mean, we had a very, very good meeting with unions there, Unison Union, and the representatives of the City Council. Also, and it was a very spirited meeting. We were able to speak to them and explain what the processes in Cuba and the developments in Cuba in the last couple of months. They have the election process, the election results, and everything that needs to be explained about Cuba, because we understand that there are many misinformation and biased information regarding what goes on in Cuba. So it has been a very, very good meeting, very well received and warmly welcomed in Liverpool as well as in London.
Well, it's a wonderful, wonderful city. Now, you and I are speaking together tomorrow afternoon at 2:00 in Hamilton House in Mabledon Place, a public meeting. You and I and the Cuban ambassador and others. Of course, I'm hoping a lot of people listening might come along to that. But where else are you speaking in this tour?
Well, I'm going to be tomorrow with you, and I very much look forward to listening to you tomorrow at the AGM event here in London, and then I'm going to Brighton before leaving for Ireland, where
I did see that. I saw you speaking in the north of Ireland, yeah?
Right, yeah.
Excellent.
So it's a very good opportunity to meet so many friends that contributed to the struggle to free the Cuban Five.
Well, you must have met people, including me, who were campaigning for your release when you were a prisoner in the United States. Britain did quite well, I think, proportionately.
They did very well. It was the campaign here in this country was very strong. The solidarity that we received from this country was very, very strong. And I want to, if you allow me, use this opportunity through the radio waves to thank all those who contributed to that campaign, because if it were not by those who helped and support the struggle for the Cuban Five, I wouldn't be here. So thank you so much, and thanks anybody from this country that helped in any way possible to have our freedoms secured.
Trust me, we owe you more thanks than you'll ever owe us. Fernando Gonzalez, Cuban Member of Parliament, thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Okay, the rest of the show is yours, 0344 499 1000. Let's take the first call. Damien in Brighton, the legend. Welcome back, Damien, and your Twitter account is going hell for leather. I see you now on my Twitter feed all the time, and I'm very glad about that.
I'm up and running, George.
Yeah, excellent.
George, the reason for my call is I'd like to discuss the position of Chuka Umunna.
Yeah, this breakaway party or not.
Yes, specifically regarding the article written by George Eaton, which was published in the New Statesman on the 13th of this month.
You know that George Bernard Shaw said being attacked in the New Statesman is rather like being slandered in an empty room. It would appear that Chuka Umunna's scoop about a breakaway from the Labour Party was also in an empty room. No other broadcaster or journalist that I know of, other than myself, has even reported this fact.
Yes, George, that's true. But I don't think it diminishes the severity of the allegations in that report.
No, not at all. It points to collusion, is the point I'm making.
Indeed, George. Now, George Eaton has reported that Chuka Umunna, who is the chair of the pro-Remain grassroots coordinating group, and I think we should remember that that's an organisation which explicitly refuses to respect the referendum result.
Mm-hmm.
He said during a meeting of that group that he had had enough of Labour, and he said that he was setting up a new party called Back Together, and that Chris Leslie was writing strategy memos for
He's
the
another Labour MP, another Blairite who resigned from Corbyn's front bench.
Correct. Now, George, I believe this is a very serious matter for two reasons. The first reason is, as we've discussed before, 65% of constituencies voted Leave. So any party that seeks to frustrate Brexit is committing electoral suicide, and it will lose the next general election.
I agree with that, yeah.
So in that sense, George, Chuka Umunna or any other Labour MP, every time they open their mouths to say they're going to refuse to respect the result, are hemorrhaging the Labour Party thousands of votes and therefore effectively campaigning for the Tories to remain in power.
Yeah, I agree.
So that's the first serious issue. Now, the second issue, George, is that it's a serious matter because if George Eaton's report is correct, then both Chuka Umunna and Chris Leslie will be in breach of a particularly grave Labour Party rule. And that party rule is Chapter 2, Section 4, Paragraph B. And it's quite explicit on this type of issue, George. It states that any member of the party who joins and or supports a political organisation other than an official Labour group or other, right, I'm just picking up the rules here, George, shall automatically be ineligible to be or remain a party member.
Yeah.
So that means that if George Eaton's report is accurate, then not only are those two individuals betraying the Labour Party, but they're also deceiving their constituents. Now, you had a guest on earlier, George, and you were discussing what should be the consequences of this.
Yes, Mark Seddon, former Tribune editor.
That's right. Now, he was absolutely correct, George. They're going to have to explain themselves to Nick Brown, Labour's chief whip, for starters. I'm going to be making a formal complaint based on the allegations in that document, which I will be sending to the General Secretary of the Labour Party on Monday morning. I will also be sending tweets to the whip's office, to the General Secretary and to the party, because we've got to have these allegations investigated. We've got two individuals who are effectively sabotaging the electability of the Labour Party and who are alleged to be discussing setting up a new party. And if they're found guilty, George, then they're going to have to be expelled. Now, the consequence of their expulsion, and it's an automatic expulsion, by the way, and they wouldn't be allowed back to reapply to the NEC for re-entering the party for 5 years. And the consequence of that, of course, would be that we'd have to have two by-elections. Now, they've got very healthy majorities in both of those seats, but that's not the point. This is a matter of principle and a matter of Labour Party rules being broken. It wouldn't matter if we had a majority of one, because betraying the party is completely unforgivable. So that's what I had to say on that, George.
Well, very interesting, yeah.
But just on a lighter note, George, I'd just like to congratulate Janet, our new Labour MP for Lewisham East, who won 50% of the vote. I'm sure she's going to be a fantastic MP, and unlike the two individuals I aforementioned, she's got a bright future in the Labour Party.
Thank you, Damien, the legend, Brighton. Let's go to Mohammed in Maidenhead. Eid Mubarak, Mohammed.
Eid Mubarak, George. Thank you very much. Means a lot. Really, it means a lot to hear that from you, George. Thank you so much.
Go ahead.
Thank you, George. Yeah, I've got two things that I'd like to talk about tonight. Thanks to you and your team. First thing is I'd like to say a quick piece about Mo Salah, and it's going to start a bit like this. Dislocation, but he carries on playing. His goal celebration, he carries on praying. When he scores a goal, then I stand up, smack, and so do the hairs on my back. Modest, pious, humble. This is football, not ready to rumble. Not jealous Ramos, then why the attack? He has the traits that Ramos may lack. Karma, Ramos, it'll be payback. Horrible foul, I couldn't play back. As for now, he's on the right track. Next game, Salah, it's return of the Mac. Yeah. So that's what I want to say about Mo Salah. And also, George, Egypt versus Russia. If Mo Salah's playing, who are you going to back? Because I know you're a big fan of Russia as well.
Oh, no, I'm supporting Egypt. I'm supporting Mo Salah. Yeah, for sure.
Bless you, George. Bless you, George. Bless you. Bless you. Yeah, well, hopefully, inshallah, we'll win the next game. And it was a tough one to say without him. Second point.
I was very sorry that he couldn't play today. One of my sons, my middle son, who looks rather like a young Mo Salah, is absolutely devoted to him. So I pray for his recovery and return to the team.
I do see the resemblance to your son, George. There is a resemblance there. And, obviously it's very heart-touching that, obviously, you guys are supporters and, may we do well.
I'm not a Liverpool supporter, and all my children follow me in terms of football allegiances, but he's the only one who's got away. He's now a Liverpool supporter.
He's now Liverpool supporter, Mo Salah. That's amazing, obviously. Well, bless him and, bless Mo Salah. And,
thank you.
May good times be ahead, George.
Okay, thank George, you. Go ahead, last point.
No, I'll tell you what, we'll leave it at that, George, because it's been a fantastic call. Thank you very much.
No, the pleasure was mine. That was a nice little piece of rap that you did there, and unusually, I liked the lyrics. Here is Stuart in West London on the email. Good evening, George. This sadistic cruelty and sanctions being imposed by the Department of Work and Pensions on the unemployed, poor, disabled and folk with mental health problems must be laid squarely on the doorsteps of Theresa May and her government of utter nastiness. The sooner we have a Labour government, the better, and good riddance to these disgusting Tories. That's from Stuart in West London. Adrian in Hemel Hempstead. I just momentarily lost, but I've got it back. When IDS invented universal credit, his hatred for the poor of society was to victimize them even more. And then again, what comes round goes round. And why would that other Tory block the voyeurism bill? Something you're not telling us? ? Adrian, there is nothing that I wouldn't tell you. Bob Justice says universal credit saves nothing. It transfers money from the vulnerable into these grubby corporations. This nation's sinking. Contrary to media-derived popular belief, it ain't that single mum or the disabled person, the immigrant, etc. that's behind it. They're just human shields. And Tony from Stirling on the email says, having suffered with a chronic illness for years, I've been on many forms of welfare. Universal credit has been a particularly frustrating process. Due to my condition, I've had to get doctor's notes to excuse me from being available for work. However, despite handing this in, I'm still expected to attend appointments with my work coach. Now that my exemption has been longer than 4 weeks, I'm now due a work capability assessment, which I'm certain to fail. A welfare state should help people up if they fall down, not kick them into submission. And Adam Gary, talking about the same subject, talking about our first guest on the universal credit issue. Your guest just now had me shocked. Not only is the situation barbaric, but it is entirely punitive. It seems being too stupid to understand how to make something efficient and humane. They've opted for a purely punitive system that is frankly disgusting. And JBW says Charlotte was really knowledgeable about what's happening to people on benefits. I'd like to support her campaign. Please, do you have details? I missed the first part of her call. Well, check my Twitter, JBW, and you'll see how to link up with Charlotte and her wonderful campaign. Half an hour to go, 0344 499 1000. Well, I've just learned that it's Mo Salah's birthday and my colleague Alan Brazil's birthday. Two very, very great footballers. One still practicing and the other on Talk Sport for the last 18 years. So happy birthday to Alan Brazil and Mo Salah. What a pity that he had to sit out the Egypt game today and they were robbed at the end with a late sucker punch from Uruguay. Now, I did start off talking about Korea, about the Trump summit, because I'm only on once a week now. So much happens in that week. We could talk for many more hours, but Ian Lee's up next at 10 o'clock. And in particular, I highlighted how it's the Liberals in the United States and in Britain who are most angry about the possibility of a peace deal in the Korean Peninsula. And so I wanted to talk to an academic in the United States who knows what he's talking about on both sides of that aisle. He's Professor Peter Kuznick of Bethesda in Maryland in the United States, and he joins us now. Peter, thanks for joining us on the show.
My pleasure, George.
Seems like weeks ago that Trump was in Singapore. I'm not a Trump supporter, but I think he did pretty well. He did a good job. He deserves the approbation of all right-thinking people, but he isn't getting it, is he?
No, he's not getting very much positive feedback on this in the United States. He's claiming enough achievement for himself. He's already awarded himself the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah,
so
well, look, if Barack Obama can get it before he's even got his feet under the desk, I would have thought Trump will have it. Now, you're a professor of history, but you're also director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at the American University. So you know a thing or two about the importance of what Trump was doing there.
Well, if you compare what the situation is now with what it was 6 months ago, when Trump and Kim were hurling insults at each other, threatening war, you have to remember that Richard Haas, who's the head of the Council on Foreign Relations, the ultimate establishment group in the United States, said that there was a 50% chance of going to war with North Korea at that point.
Wow.
Other military experts said that it would be 25 to 30% chance of war. So we were very, very close to an actual military confrontation. And we know what that would have meant. One Stanford study said that if things went wrong, that 1 million people could die the first day alone. There was a possibility of more than 1 million people dying. We know that, and that North Korea did not even have to use its nuclear weapons in a confrontation to cause that kind of effect. They have more than 10,000 artillery pieces on the border, 35 miles from Seoul, a city with 25 million people. So this was a very, very serious, very dangerous situation. So whatever we might say critical of the way Trump performed in Singapore, the situation now is vastly, vastly better than it was just months ago.
Well, I expect the military-industrial complex and the hawks, the neocon fanatics, to be dismayed, disappointed when jaw triumphs over war. What I didn't expect quite was the wall of hatred towards the Singapore summit from what you might vaguely call the left, what passes for the left in the United States, the Liberals, the Democrats, and what passes for the left in Britain in the form of the Guardian newspaper and so on. How is that? How has that come about?
Well, it's partly because there's this overall demonization of Trump, much of which is well-deserved. you have to remember that at the same time that Trump was making positive moves on the Korean front, he was tearing up a much better nuclear deal than we're ever going to get with Korea with Iran. I mean, this man is mercurial, he's impulsive, he's reckless, and every once in a while he does the right thing. But it's just as possible that he'll do something terrible. And we can't really trust him to not blow this deal up. He has backed off somewhat. I mean, he's behaved very well in a sense on the Korean front, but at the same time he's doing terrible things in other ways. So the people who are criticizing him, maybe they pass for the left, but we're really talking about liberal Democrats and neoconservatives. And the liberal Democrats have a vendetta against Trump. They're trying to do to Trump what the Republicans did to Obama, and that's to try to negate every possible achievement. It's a mistake. Trump should be encouraged to do the right thing. In Korea, he did the right thing, but it's only the very, very beginning, the very first step. In fact, what he got out of this summit was less than we had had in 1994 or in 2005. So this is not – it's a major achievement because it's Trump, and it's a major achievement because of where we were so recently. But in the long run, this is really just the first step along a long road. One American expert, Sig Hecker, who's been to North Korea and seen their facilities several times, has estimated that it'll take up to 15 years to get full denuclearization of the Korean peninsula. But even the term denuclearization, we don't agree on that, what that means. To Kim Jong-Un, that means that the United States has to eliminate all of its capabilities of a nuclear attack upon North Korea as well. So we've got the B-51s, the B-52s and the B-1 bombers in Guam. We've got the Trident submarines. I mean, this is a much more involved, complicated process that's going to need a lot of statesmanship. And what we know about Trump is that statesmanship is not one of his strong suits.
No, I just interviewed moments ago a Cuban MP, and I was asking him this question. Let me ask you it. How can you embrace North Korea but refuse to shake hands with Cuba, which doesn't have nuclear weapons, isn't hurling insults and threats at you, and is only 90 miles away? And then, as you said, there's the Iran front where Trump is doubling down for the neocons. There's the Israel-Palestine front where he's doubling down for the Kuznicks. This is it just his mercurial character, or is it that on some things he can go out and follow his instincts, and in other things he's an absolute prisoner?
I don't know if he's a prisoner, but he's certainly not a consistent thinker. He's not a strategic thinker. He's not a long-term thinker. But he's got certain impulses, and he goes by his impulses. And his instinct is to assume that every deal that the United States has ever made with everybody is not in America's interest. And so he wants to tear up every trade agreement, every military pact, every basing agreement, some of which is good. So he's critical of NATO, although he's caved in on that front. He wants to see the United States cut back its commitments in terms of bases, 800 bases around the world, this empire of bases, these troops that he's got spread around the world. His instinct on a lot of that is right. But what we've seen is that he doesn't know very much. In the lead-up to the G7 summit, for example, he accused Canada of having burned down the White House in Washington. He doesn't know anything, right? I mean, so we're dealing with a man, you've got a moral void and an intellectual abyss there, and sometimes he does the right thing. And when he does the right thing, we've got to encourage him to do more of the right thing. And dangle that Nobel Peace Prize in front of him.
Now that he's got the Nobel Peace Prize, let's look at his prospects for a re-election. How has the Korea deal played in Peoria?
Well, the problem is that the Korea deal took place right after the G7 summit. And the G7 summit is not going to play well in Peoria. Trade war with America's allies is not going to help the Midwest. And especially because a lot of America's allies in retaliating are smart enough to go after the red states where Trump's base is. So especially going to an agricultural war with Canada makes no sense for Trump's own base. So where he might pick up some votes in Pennsylvania or Wisconsin, he's not going to be picking up votes in the areas that are really crucial to him. So I don't know how any of this is going to play out. The American economy is relatively strong on paper. Most of Trump's supporters are not seeing the benefits from that. The tax cuts, like the rest of his policies, are helping the super wealthy in the United States. He's cutting back on aspects of Obamacare that provide people the health care that they need. It makes no sense, again, for Trump's supporters. The opioid crisis is very serious in the United States. Those are Trump's people. So I think that overall, when he behaves slightly presidential, his ratings go up. And he's done more of that of late than he had earlier. But I think the Republicans are still in a very, very precarious position when this election comes. And that's despite the fact that the Democrats have been just awful, as you were suggesting. It's not just on Korea. They don't stand for anything very positive in the United States. They are obsessed with demonization of Putin and the Russia scandal, and have used that and their attacks on Trump instead of putting forth a positive program that's going to actually help people in this country. And so the momentum that the liberal Democrats got from a Bernie Sanders candidacy seems to have dissipated largely. And the message that Bernie had represented in a positive way, which he still stands for, has been lost in this din from the Russia scandals and the Trump impeachment.
Peter, I really hope that you'll come back on the show again. We are in want, as we say, of your kind of voice in the United States, here in the British media. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Professor Peter Kuznick, the Professor of History and Director of the Nuclear Studies Institute at American University, on the line there from Maryland. Now, Martin in Belfast says, George, I work in a dole office in Belfast and can state that universal credit is a throwback to the workhouse. They have had to increase security guards in frontline benefit offices to implement the Victorian policy. Universal credit is a disaster for those who have to claim and for very low-paid staff who work in these depressing dumps. Very good, very important point, Martin. Tony X, the protest board, my old pal, says, I'm extremely fortunate in that I've never needed to make a claim on Social Security, but this doesn't stop me from understanding how brutal the system has become over the past decade. Tory poverty management coupled with their hatred of those in need. Let's hear from Clive in Twickenham. Go ahead, Clive.
Hello there, George.
Yes.
Nice to talk to you.
And you, sir.
I agree entirely what you just said there, so I won't cover that again.
Okay.
Terrible. My son's on it, and terrible things. The typical Tory policy.
It's vile.
Well, I was talking Brexit. They were talking about the other day on one of the channels, and they said that all the people down in, especially in Cornwall, well, hoping and praying that we get the Brexit deal and get something comes out of it. If it doesn't, they're not going to be part of the UK at all. But anyway, regarding the fishing rights, in 1964, Douglas Hughes signed an agreement that no matter whether we're in or out of the EU, the fishing rights for the EU will stay the same. So I can't see why they're worrying whether we in or out, to be quite honest, down there. Well, they say, particularly want to be in or like I do.
Well, that's what the government have conceded in part. But, of course, when we leave the European Union, leave the single market and all the other paraphernalia, we will have, if we want to, take control over our own territorial waters. And we can allow people to fish when we decide to and stop them doing so when we decide not to, surely.
Well, according to this man that was talking, some reporter, I'm not just, he was saying that people just don't, it was a few months ago. He said they don't understand this is binding. This agreement we signed in 1964 under Sir Agnes Douglas Hume, Sir Alec Douglas Hume.
Was this during the Cod War? I forget now when the Cod War was.
Yes. The Cod War was in 64 under Harold Wilson.
Yeah.
And Iceland and the gunboats and one thing and another.
So, as Alec Douglas Hume preceded Harold Wilson, that automatically doesn't seem right, Clive.
No, it doesn't to me, but this it was signed by Harold Wilson. The man didn't actually say. He said there was an agreement signed, and it pays to look it up. I've vision problems.
Well, I'm not an expert on fisheries or farming, but it doesn't seem to me at all likely that we are bound in perpetuity by governments long gone to allow European Union powers to fish in our waters except by agreement when we've left the European Union. That just doesn't add up to me, Clive.
Well, that's what I was queried with my son. He said, no, I heard it.
What I do know is that Michael Gove has been criticised by coastal communities for concessions he has proposed that we make as part of the European Union disengagement. But, of course, as no deal has yet been even drawn up, never mind agreed upon, that's all, like everything else, still up for grabs, still in the mix.
So this agreement then that was signed, which was binding...
No, there's no such thing as binding.
That's what I thought.
There's no such thing as binding. Governments cannot bind each other. Parliaments cannot bind each other. Treaties can be renegotiated. And if the treaty was with the European Union, when we leave the European Union, it's hard to see how any such treaty would continue to be binding.
Yeah. The Maastricht Treaty, is that still, if we leave, does that...
No, that only affects members of the European Union.
Yeah. It was, so I queried it with him. I said, you sure that was right what he said? It's binding no matter...
Well, there's a lot of disinformation and misinformation out there, Clive, as we both know. Thank you very much indeed for your call. A pleasure to talk to you. John Hodgkins says, George, you're exactly right. The euro is simply a German magic money tree. I recently came across an amazing statistic. Since 1990, average German wages have risen by 120%. During the same period, Italian wages have risen by 3%. It's hardly surprising that the Italian people have just elected a bunch of comedians. Well, John, I'm not sure that's a proper description of the five-star movement. It was started by a comedian, by a comic, that's true. But it won the biggest share of the vote in the recent Italian elections. It cleaned up in the south of Italy. It is a populist movement with some left-wing policies and some right-wing policies, which populists usually do. And in my opinion, it is a force which can only go stronger because, and this harks back to the point I made earlier about the au pair tendency. I thought that the Guardian article on that, lamenting the difficulties that people are already having in getting a decent au pair not being, of course, covered by minimum wage legislation, And all kinds of obfuscation is possible through offering board and lodgings as part of the deal and so on. The au pair tendency is really the EU tendency. The people who profit from our membership of the EU and its free movement of labour pillar. The people who can get a cheap electrician, a cheap builder, a cheap au pair, can get a cheap macchiato served by a cheap labour waiter or waitress. The people who have done well out of our 40-plus years in the EU are unsurprisingly loath to let it go. The problem for the EU fanatics is that vast tracts of the country don't have au pairs. They don't, Mr. and Mrs. Guardian. They really, really don't. And they don't give a toss that you are going to find it more difficult to find an au pair. For them, they are in post-industrial Britain, Desolation Row Britain, urban dereliction Britain, unemployment Britain, short-term or no contract at all Britain, 0 hours Britain, underpaid Britain, benefit Britain, crushed by universal credit Britain. They're the people who've gained nothing from our membership of the European Union, and guess what? There are fewer people who need au pairs than people with a gripe against how things are. Now, whether they are because of the European Union or because they are because of the kind of governments we've had, in the end, didn't matter when the referendum happened. The referendum was an adjudication by millions of people on how things are. And how things are was found wanting. It's been marvellous for me. I hope it was for you. And if it was, come back next week at the same time and stay tuned for Ian Lee.